Chapter 1, The Unseen Visitor. Space was a cold, silent void, an endless expanse of darkness that enveloped everything within it. Far from the comforts of Earth, where life thrived and time flowed in a steady rhythm, the vast cosmos held secrets that even the most advanced minds on Earth could barely fathom. For the crew aboard the Space Shuttle Endurance, this mission was supposed to be just another routine check on the International Space Station. Little did they know, their lives were about to be changed forever by an encounter so extraordinary that it would defy all logic and understanding. Colonel Jack Hayes, a veteran astronaut with a calm and commanding presence, was leading the mission. His crew included Dr. Maria Alvarez, an astrophysicist known for her brilliant mind and unyielding curiosity, and Lieutenant Greg Mason, the shuttle's seasoned pilot who had seen his share of space anomalies but nothing like what they were about to face. It all began as they approached the ISS. The Earth loomed large beneath them, a beautiful, fragile blue orb floating in the infinite blackness. The shuttle hummed quietly, its systems running smoothly, and the crew was focused on their task, inspecting the station for any damage or irregularities. "Everything looks good from here," Mason reported as he adjusted the shuttle's position to align with the ISS. "No signs of impact or external damage." Hayes nodded, his eyes scanning the various monitors. "Let's get this done quickly and efficiently. The sooner we finish, the sooner we can get back home." Dr. Alvarez was already immersed in her work, analyzing data streams from the station. "There's something odd," she said suddenly, her voice tinged with surprise. Hayes turned to her. "What is it?" "I'm picking up an unusual signal. It's faint, but it's there. It's not from the ISS, and it's definitely not Earth-based. Could be some kind of interference, or something else." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Interference from what?" "We're in the middle of space." Alvarez frowned, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she tried to pinpoint the source. "I don't know, but it's coming from somewhere close." Before they could delve deeper into the mystery, a blinding flash of light filled the shuttle's cockpit. The crew shielded their eyes as the light intensified, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving them blinking in the sudden darkness. "What the hell was that?" Mason exclaimed, trying to regain his bearings. Hayes's heart pounded in his chest. "Everyone, stay calm. Alvarez, can you identify the source of that light?" "I'm trying," she replied, her voice steady despite the situation. "But whatever it was, it's gone now. No residual energy, no trace, it's like it never happened." Hayes wasn't convinced. "Keep looking. There has to be something." As Alvarez continued her analysis, Mason noticed something outside the shuttle. Colonel, you might want to take a look at this." Hayes turned to the viewport, his breath catching in his throat. There, just beyond the ISS, was a figure, floating silently in the void of space. It was humanoid in shape, with pale green skin that seemed to glow faintly against the backdrop of stars. Its eyes were large and black, absorbing all light and reflecting nothing. But the most startling detail was that it wasn't wearing a spacesuit. It was out there, in the vacuum of space, completely exposed and yet perfectly fine. "My God," Hayes whispered, unable to tear his eyes away from the sight. The figure drifted closer to the shuttle, its movements slow and deliberate, as if it was studying them just as intently as they were studying it. "What do we do?" Mason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We stay calm," Hayes replied, though his heart was racing. "Alvarez, any readings?" She shook her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Nothing. It's like it's not even there. No heat signature, no radiation, nothing. It's impossible." The figure raised a hand, and for a moment, it seemed as if it was waving. Then, without warning, it touched the hull of the shuttle, and a wave of energy surged through the ship, causing the lights to flicker and the instruments to go haywire. "Systems are failing," Mason shouted, frantically trying to regain control of the shuttle. Hayes grabbed the radio. "Mission Control, this is Endurance. We are experiencing a systems failure. Do you copy?" There was only static. The figure outside the shuttle seemed to pulse with energy, its entire form shimmering as if it was made of pure light. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it disappeared, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The lights in the shuttle flickered back to life, and the instruments slowly stabilized. But the crew was left with more questions than answers. What the hell just happened? Mason asked, his hands still gripping the controls. I don't know, Hayes replied, his mind racing. But whatever that thing was, it wasn't just a figment of our imagination. Dr. Alvarez stared at her monitor, her face pale. The signal, it's back. And it's stronger now. It's coming from inside the shuttle. Hayes felt a chill run down his spine. Inside? How is that possible? Before Alvarez could answer, the shuttle's communication systems crackled to life, and a voice echoed through the cockpit, a voice that was not human. Do not be afraid, it said, the words strangely distorted yet perfectly understandable. We mean you no harm. The crew exchanged shocked glances. Who, or what are you? Hayes asked, trying to keep his voice steady. We are explorers, like you, the voice replied. We have watched your species for many cycles. We seek knowledge, just as you do. Where are you from? Alvarez asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. From a place beyond your understanding, the voice answered. But that is not important. What matters is that we have chosen you. Chosen us for what? Hayes demanded, his mind racing with possibilities. To help us, the voice replied. There is something coming. Something that threatens not just your world, but ours as well. We need your help to stop it. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The crew was silent, each of them grappling with the enormity of what they had just heard. What do you mean, something is coming? Hayes finally asked. A force, the voice replied. Ancient and powerful. It has awakened, and it will consume everything in its path. We cannot stop it alone. Hayes felt a surge of fear. And what makes you think we can help? Because, the voice said, you have something that we do not. A strength, a resilience. Together, we may stand a chance. The crew was silent, the weight of the decision bearing down on them. Hayes looked at his team, seeing the uncertainty and fear in their eyes. But he also saw determination. All right, he said finally. We'll help you. But you need to tell us everything. What exactly are we dealing with? The voice was silent for a moment, as if considering the question. Then it spoke again, and its words sent a chill through the entire crew. It is called the Devourer, the voice said. A being of pure destruction, born from the heart of a dying star. It has consumed countless worlds, leaving nothing but void in its wake. And now, it has set its sights on your galaxy. Hayes felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. And how do we stop it? There is a weapon, the voice replied. An ancient artifact, hidden on a world lost to time. It is the only thing that can destroy the Devourer. But it is also dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could unleash a power even greater than the Devourer itself. And you want us to find this weapon? Alvarez asked. Yes, the voice said. But you will not be alone. We will guide you. But you must act quickly. The Devourer is already on its way. The weight of the task ahead settled heavily on the crew. They were just astronauts, explorers of space, not warriors or heroes. And yet, the fate of the galaxy now rested on their shoulders. Where do we start? Hayes asked, his voice filled with resolve. The first clue lies on a world you call Mars, the voice replied. It is there that the path will be revealed. With that, the communication cut off, leaving the crew in stunned silence once more. For a long moment, no one spoke. The reality of what they were being asked to do was almost too much to comprehend, but finally, Hayes broke the silence. Set a course for Mars, he ordered, his voice firm. Whatever this Devourer is, we can't let it reach Earth. Mason nodded and began entering the coordinates, his hands shaking slightly. Alvarez sat back in her chair, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. As the shuttle adjusted its course, heading towards the red planet, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that their lives would never be the same. They were venturing into the unknown, chasing a weapon that might not even exist, guided by an alien force they didn't fully understand, but there was no turning back now. The mission had changed. It was no longer just about maintaining the ISS or conducting experiments. It was about survival of their species, and possibly countless others. As the shuttle sped through the vastness of space, Hayes allowed himself a moment of doubt. Was this really the right decision? Could they trust the alien voice? And if they did find this weapon, would they be able to control it? But then he pushed those doubts aside. They had no choice. The stakes were too high, the risks too great. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, as a team, and with that thought, Hayes steeled himself for the journey ahead. Mars awaited, and with it, the first step in a quest that would take them to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, and perhaps beyond. It's showing us how to activate it, Alvarez said, her voice filled with wonder. But it's complicated, it'll take time to decipher. Time we don't have, Hayes replied, his voice tense. The Devourer is almost here. We need to figure this out now. The crew worked frantically, their minds racing as they tried to decipher the symbols and activate the weapon. The cavern was filled with the sounds of their efforts, the air thick with tension and urgency. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alvarez let out a cry of triumph. I've got it. I know how to activate the weapon. Do it, Hayes ordered, his voice filled with resolve. We need to be ready when the Devourer arrives. Alvarez activated the weapon, the symbols flaring to life as the device powered up. The air crackled with energy, and the cavern began to shake as the weapon prepared to fire. We need to get out of here, Mason shouted, his voice filled with urgency. This whole place is going to collapse. The crew scrambled to reach the surface, the ground shaking violently beneath their feet. The weapon's energy pulse grew stronger, filling the cavern with a blinding light. As they reached the surface, the ground beneath them erupted in a massive explosion of energy, sending shockwaves across the moon's surface. The weapon had fired, its energy blast tearing through the ice and rock, creating a massive crater, but the weapon was not done. As the energy pulse expanded, it shot out into space, a beam of light that traveled at impossible speeds, heading directly for the Devourer. We did it, Hayes said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. We actually did it. But their relief was short-lived. As the beam of light traveled through space, it seemed to awaken something within the Devourer. The massive entity, once moving slowly and deliberately, now surged forward with terrifying speed, its dark mass writhing with anger. The Devourer, it's reacting to the weapon, Alvarez said, her voice filled with fear. It's coming for us. Hayes's heart sank as he realized the truth. The weapon had not destroyed the Devourer, it had only angered it. And now, the entity was coming for them, faster and more powerful than ever before. We need to get out of here, Hayes said, his voice filled with urgency. We can't stay on this moon. It's not safe. The crew rushed back to the shuttle, their hearts pounding with fear. As they lifted off from the moon's surface, they could see the Devourer in the distance, its massive form growing larger with each passing moment. We need to figure out a new plan, Hayes said, his voice filled with determination. There has to be a way to stop this thing. But as they sped away from the moon, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were out of time, out of options, and the Devourer was closing in, and as the massive entity loomed ever closer, a sense of dread filled the shuttle. The crew had faced impossible odds before, but this was something else entirely. As they sped through space, Hayes felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. They had come so far, fought so hard, but it wasn't enough. The Devourer was unstoppable, and it was coming to consume them all, but then, as all hope seemed lost, a new signal appeared on their scanners, one that filled the crew with a mix of hope and confusion. "It's another ship," Alvarez said, her voice filled with disbelief. "But it's not human." As they approached the signal, a massive, alien ship came into view, its sleek, otherworldly design unlike anything they had ever seen before. The ship pulsed with a soft, blue light, its surface smooth and metallic, and as they neared the ship, a voice echoed through the shuttle, a voice that was both familiar and completely alien. "You have done well," the voice said, its tone filled with a strange mix of warmth and power. "But your journey is not yet over." The crew exchanged glances, their hearts pounding with anticipation. "Who are you?" Hayes asked, his voice filled with a mix of fear and hope. "We are the Guardians," the voice replied, its tone soothing yet commanding. "We have been watching you, guiding you. And now, we offer our assistance." The alien ship extended a beam of light towards the shuttle, enveloping it in a warm, protective glow. The crew felt a surge of energy, their exhaustion fading away as the ship's power coursed through them. "The Devourer is a threat to all life," the voice continued. "But with our combined strength, we can stop it." Hayes felt a surge of hope as the alien ship's power surrounded them. They were no longer alone. With the help of the Guardians, they had a chance, a real chance, to defeat the Devourer. "What do we need to do?" Hayes asked, his voice filled with determination. "Follow us," the voice replied. "Together, we will end this." The alien ship turned, speeding towards the Devourer with the shuttle close behind. The crew felt a renewed sense of purpose, their fear replaced by a fierce determination. As they approached the massive entity, the Guardian's ship began to glow with a brilliant, blue light, its energy building to a powerful crescendo. "The time has come," the voice said, its tone filled with resolve. "Prepare yourselves." The alien ship unleashed a massive beam of energy, the light cutting through the darkness of space and striking the Devourer with a force unlike anything the crew had ever seen. The Devourer let out a deafening roar, its massive form writhing and contorting as the energy surged through it. The crew watched in awe as the entity's dark mass began to break apart, its once imposing form disintegrating before their eyes. But the battle was not over. As the Devourer's form broke apart, it released a massive wave of energy, the shock wave tearing through space and heading directly for the shuttle. "Brace yourselves!" Hayes shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The shock wave hit the shuttle with a force that sent them reeling, the ship shaking violently as the energy surged through it. The crew held on for dear life, their hearts pounding with fear, but just as quickly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The shock wave passed, leaving the shuttle intact and the crew unharmed. "We did it," Hayes said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." The alien ship turned to face them, its blue light pulsing with a gentle, reassuring glow. "The Devourer has been destroyed," the voice said, its tone filled with warmth. "You have saved your world, and countless others. You have proven yourselves worthy." Hayes felt a wave of relief wash over him, his heart finally beginning to calm. They had done it. They had stopped the Devourer, and saved the galaxy from certain destruction, but even as the relief settled in, a new sense of determination took hold. The galaxy was vast, filled with unknown dangers and mysteries yet to be uncovered. "Our journey is far from over," Hayes said, his voice filled with resolve. "There's still so much out there, so much to discover." The alien ship pulsed with light, as if in agreement. "The galaxy is full of wonders and challenges," the voice said. "And we will be there to guide you." With one last look at the alien ship, Hayes set a course for Earth. They had accomplished the impossible, but their mission was not yet complete. As the shuttle sped through space, the crew felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had faced the unknown, fought against impossible odds, and emerged victorious, and as they looked out at the stars, they knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was waiting for them, and they were ready for whatever came next. Chapter 4, The Search for Answers. Back on the shuttle, the crew was in dire straits. Mason's injuries were severe, and despite their best efforts, his condition was deteriorating rapidly. Alvarez did what she could to stabilize him, but without proper medical facilities, there was little she could do. "We need to get him back to Earth," Alvarez said, her voice strained with exhaustion. "He won't survive much longer without treatment." Hayes nodded, his heart heavy. "We'll set a course for home." "But what about the Devourer?" "We're running out of time." "We can't fight it without a weapon," Alvarez replied. "And the only lead we had is gone. We need to regroup, figure out our next move." As Hayes plotted the course back to Earth, his mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. They had failed to find the weapon on Mars, and the Devourer was still coming. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and they were no closer to stopping it, but as the shuttle lifted off from the Martian surface, a new signal appeared on their scanners, a faint, almost imperceptible signal, coming from deep within the solar system. "Do you see that?" Alvarez asked, her voice filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Hayes studied the readings, his brow furrowed. "It's faint, but it's there. It could be another artifact, another piece of the puzzle. Should we investigate?" Alvarez asked, her eyes searching Hayes's face for answers. Hayes hesitated for a moment, weighing their options. Time was running out, and every second they spent chasing down leads was a second closer to the Devourer's arrival. But they couldn't go back empty-handed. They needed something, anything, that could help them fight back. "Let's check it out," Hayes finally said, his voice filled with resolve. "It's our only lead. We can't afford to ignore it." With a new destination in mind, the shuttle changed course, speeding towards the unknown signal. The crew was battered and weary, but their determination remained unshaken. They had faced the impossible before, and they would do it again. As they approached the source of the signal, they found themselves nearing a distant, icy moon, one that had been largely ignored by previous missions. The moon was covered in thick ice, its surface reflecting the faint light of the distant sun. "The signal is coming from beneath the ice," Alvarez said, her voice filled with wonder. "There's something down there, something ancient. Can we land?" Hayes asked, his eyes fixed on the moon's surface. "It'll be tricky," Mason replied, his voice weak but determined. "But I can do it." With great care, Mason guided the shuttle down to the moon's surface, the landing gear crunching softly on the icy ground. The temperature outside was impossibly cold, the atmosphere thin and unbreathable. "We'll need to drill through the ice," Alvarez said, already preparing the equipment. "Whatever's down there, it's been buried for a long time." The crew worked quickly, setting up the drill and beginning the long, laborious process of cutting through the thick ice. As they drilled deeper, the signal grew stronger, and a sense of anticipation filled the air. Finally, after hours of work, the drill broke through the ice, revealing a dark, cavernous space below. The air was frigid, and a thin mist rose from the opening, obscuring their view of what lay beneath. "We're through," Alvarez said, her voice filled with excitement. "Whatever's down there, it's waiting for us." Hayes peered into the darkness, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. "Let's go see what we've found." With the equipment secured, the crew began their descent into the cavern, the walls of ice glowing faintly in the light of their torches. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and the deeper they went, the stronger the feeling of being watched. Finally, they reached the bottom of the cavern, their torches casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the center of the chamber was a massive, crystalline structure, its surface covered in strange symbols and patterns. "This is it," Alvarez whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is what we've been looking for." As they approached the structure, the air seemed to hum with energy, the symbols glowing faintly in response to their presence. It was clear that this was no ordinary artifact, it was something far more powerful, something that had been hidden away for a reason. "Be careful," Hayes warned, his voice tense. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." Alvarez nodded, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the surface of the structure. The moment her fingers made contact, the symbols flared to life, filling the cavern with a blinding light. For a moment, everything was chaos. The air crackled with energy, and the ground shook beneath their feet. The crew was thrown back, their suits sparking as the energy surged through them, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, leaving the cavern in silence. Hayes struggled to his feet, his vision swimming. He could hear Alvarez and Mason groaning in pain, but they were alive. As his vision cleared, he saw that the structure had changed. The once crystalline surface was now smooth and metallic, the symbols gone. "Are you both okay?" Hayes asked, his voice filled with concern. "We're fine," Alvarez replied, though her voice was shaky. "But what happened? What did we do?" Before Hayes could answer, the structure began to pulse with a soft, rhythmic light, the metal surface rippling like liquid. The air around them grew thick with energy, and a low, melodic hum filled the cavern. "It's reacting to us," Mason said, his voice filled with awe. "Whatever it is, it's alive." The hum grew louder, and the structure began to shift and change, reshaping itself into a new form. The metal flowed like water, molding itself into a large, intricate device, a device that was unmistakably a weapon. "We did it," Alvarez whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. "This is the weapon." Hayes approached the weapon, his heart pounding. "But how does it work? How do we use it against the Devourer?" As if in response to his question, the weapon flared with light, and a series of symbols appeared on its surface, symbols that matched those they had seen on Mars. Chapter 3, The Awakening. Hayes awoke to a world of pain and confusion. His body felt heavy, his limbs unresponsive. He was lying on a cold, hard surface, the air thick with the scent of burnt metal and ozone. Slowly, he opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh light that filled the chamber. His vision was blurry, and it took a moment for him to realize where he was. The chamber was in ruins, the walls cracked and blackened, the carvings obliterated by the explosion of light. The structure at the center of the chamber was still glowing faintly, but it was clear that it had been damaged in the blast. Hayes struggled to sit up, his body protesting with every movement. He looked around, searching for his crew. "Alvarez. Mason." He called out, his voice weak and hoarse. There was no response. Panic surged through him as he crawled across the debris-strewn floor, his heart pounding with fear. He had to find them. They had to be alive. After what felt like an eternity, he spotted a figure lying motionless near the shattered remains of the structure. With a burst of adrenaline, he dragged himself over to the figure, praying that it wasn't too late. That it was Alvarez. Her suit was scorched and torn, her helmet cracked, but she was breathing, barely. "Maria. Maria, wake up," Hayes pleaded, shaking her gently. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Jack, what happened?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We activated the weapon," Hayes replied, his voice trembling. "But something went wrong. There was an explosion, the chamber is destroyed." Alvarez winced as she tried to move, her face contorted with pain. "Where's Mason?" "I don't know," Hayes admitted, his heart sinking. "I haven't found him yet." "We have to find him," Alvarez said, her voice filled with determination despite her injuries. "He could be hurt, or worse." Hayes nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'll find him. You stay here and try to stabilize yourself. We'll get out of this, I promise." With great effort, Hayes managed to stand, his legs shaking beneath him. He scanned the chamber, searching for any sign of Mason. The debris made it difficult to move, but he pressed on, his mind focused on one thing, finding his friend. Finally, after what felt like hours of searching, Hayes spotted a glint of metal beneath a pile of rubble. His heart skipped a beat as he realized it was Mason's helmet. With a surge of strength, Hayes began to dig through the debris, his hands bleeding as he tore away the rocks and metal. When he finally uncovered Mason's body, he felt a wave of relief. He was still alive, but just barely. Mason's suit was badly damaged, his body crushed beneath the weight of the debris. His breathing was shallow, his eyes half closed, and Hayes knew that he didn't have much time. "Hang on, Greg," Hayes said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to get you out of here." He worked quickly, using what little strength he had left to free Mason from the rubble. Every movement sent waves of pain through his body, but he didn't care. He had to save his friend. When Mason was finally free, Hayes carefully lifted him onto his shoulders, gritting his teeth against the pain. He staggered back to where Alvarez was waiting, his vision blurring with exhaustion. "We need to get back to the shuttle," Hayes said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not safe here." Alvarez nodded, her face pale but determined. "I can walk, just help me up." With Hayes's help, Alvarez managed to stand, though it was clear that she was in no condition to move quickly. Together, they made their way towards the entrance of the chamber, each step a battle against the pain and fatigue that threatened to overwhelm them. As they reached the door, Hayes paused, looking back at the ruined structure. The weapon, whatever it had been, was now destroyed. Their mission had failed, and the Devourer was still on its way, but they were alive. And as long as they were alive, there was still hope. "We need to find another way," Hayes said, his voice filled with determination. "There has to be something else out there, another weapon, another solution. We can't give up now." Alvarez nodded, her eyes filled with the same resolve. "We'll find it. We have to." With one last look at the chamber, Hayes led the way out, the door closing behind them with a final, resounding thud. Chapter 2, The Red Planet's Secrets. As the shuttle approached Mars, the crew's anticipation grew. The surface of the red planet loomed large in the viewport, its dusty plains and rugged terrain a stark contrast to the blackness of space. Mars had always held a special place in the human imagination, a symbol of both the potential for life beyond Earth and the desolate, uninhabitable reality of our nearest planetary neighbor. Now, it was their destination, not just for exploration, but for survival. Mason guided the shuttle down towards the coordinates provided by the alien voice, his hand steady on the controls despite the growing tension. The crew had been silent for much of the journey, each of them lost in their thoughts, grappling with the enormity of what they were about to undertake. As they entered the Martian atmosphere, the shuttle rattled slightly, the friction creating a faint glow around the hull. The landscape below was a sea of red, dotted with craters and mountains that had stood untouched for millennia. In the distance, the towering Olympus Mons rose like a sentinel, the largest volcano in the solar system. "Landing site is in sight," Mason reported, his voice calm. "Adjusting trajectory." Hayes peered through the viewport, spotting the flat expanse where they would land. It was a desolate region, devoid of any visible structures or signs of life. But beneath the surface, something ancient and powerful lay hidden, something that could be the key to stopping the Devourer. "Take us down," Hayes ordered, his mind already focused on the mission ahead. The shuttle descended smoothly, the landing gear deploying with a soft thud as it touched down on the Martian soil. Outside, the landscape was eerily still, the thin atmosphere offering no breeze to disturb the dust that had settled over the ages. "Everyone suit up," Hayes instructed. "We don't know what we'll find out there, so be prepared for anything." The crew donned their space suits in silence, the familiar routine providing a small measure of comfort in the face of the unknown. As they prepared to disembark, Alvarez checked her instruments, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The signal is still strong," she said, her voice slightly muffled by the helmet. "It's coming from directly beneath us." "Then let's not waste any time," Hayes replied, leading the way to the airlock. The door hissed open, revealing the barren landscape beyond. One by one, the crew stepped out onto the surface, their boots sinking slightly into the dusty soil. The sky above was a pale pink, the sun a distant, cold orb casting long shadows across the ground. Alvarez activated her scanner, sweeping it across the area. "There's definitely something buried here," she confirmed. "The signal is strongest right over this ridge." The crew made their way to the ridge, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thin atmosphere. As they crested the rise, they saw it, a large, circular structure partially buried in the ground, its surface covered in strange, intricate carvings. "That's no natural formation," Mason muttered, his voice tinged with awe. "What do you think it is?" "An entrance," Alvarez replied, her eyes wide with fascination. Or at least it used to be. This could be some kind of ancient facility or temple. Hayes approached the structure, his heart pounding with excitement and trepidation. He reached out and brushed away some of the dust, revealing more of the carvings, alien symbols and patterns that seemed to glow faintly under his touch. "This is it," he said softly, a sense of awe in his voice. "This is what we're looking for." Alvarez knelt beside the structure, examining the carvings more closely. "These symbols, they're similar to the ones on the artifact we found on Earth. But these are much older. Can you translate them?" Hayes asked. "I'm not sure," Alvarez admitted. "But I can try. There's something about them, they seem almost familiar, like they're trying to communicate something directly to us." As Alvarez worked, Mason kept a wary eye on the surroundings. The silence was unnerving, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. After what felt like an eternity, Alvarez stood up, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. "I think I've got it. These symbols, they're a warning. It's telling us to be careful, that the power inside this structure is both a weapon and a curse." "A curse?" Mason echoed, frowning. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means we need to proceed with caution," Hayes said, his voice firm. "We don't know what we're dealing with here, and we can't afford to make any mistakes." The crew carefully cleared away more of the debris, revealing what appeared to be a large, sealed door. The carvings on the door were more intricate than any they had seen so far, and at the center was a symbol that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. "This is the entrance," Alvarez said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to open it." Hayes studied the door, his mind racing. "There has to be a way." The voice said this was the first clue. "Maybe it's a test, something that requires us to prove we're worthy. Or it could be a trap," Mason muttered, his hand instinctively moving towards the weapon at his side. "We don't have a choice," Hayes replied. "If this is the key to stopping the Devourer, we have to take the risk." With a deep breath, Hayes reached out and placed his hand on the glowing symbol. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the symbol flared brightly, and the door began to shift and slide open with a deep, rumbling sound. The crew tensed, ready for anything. But as the door opened fully, they were met with only darkness, an impenetrable void that seemed to stretch on forever. "Lights on," Hayes ordered, his voice steady. The crew activated their suit lights, the beams cutting through the darkness to reveal a massive chamber beyond the door. The walls were lined with more carvings and symbols, and at the far end of the chamber was a large, ominous structure that hummed with a deep, resonant energy. "This is it," Alvarez said, her voice filled with awe. "This is what we've been looking for." As they stepped into the chamber, the door behind them slowly closed, sealing them inside. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with power. The crew approached the structure, their lights casting long shadows across the chamber. The closer they got, the more intense the humming became, until it was almost deafening. "This must be the weapon," Hayes said, his voice barely audible over the noise. "But how do we activate it?" Alvarez examined the structure, her mind racing. "There's some kind of control panel here, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen. I don't know if I can operate it." "We have to try," Hayes replied. "The Devourer is on its way, and this is our only chance to stop it." With trembling hands, Alvarez began to manipulate the controls, her fingers moving over the alien symbols with a mix of fear and determination. As she worked, the humming grew louder, and the chamber began to vibrate with an almost unbearable intensity. Then, suddenly, the humming stopped. The chamber fell silent, and for a moment, it seemed as if nothing had happened. But then, the structure began to glow, its surface pulsing with a brilliant, blinding light. The crew shielded their eyes as the light intensified, filling the chamber with a searing heat. "We need to get out of here," Mason shouted, his voice filled with panic. But before they could move, the light exploded outward, enveloping the crew in a wave of energy. Hayes felt his body lift off the ground, his vision blurring as the world around him disintegrated into chaos, and then, everything went black.